social work is a helping profession that is highly monitored, like nursing or medicine. So we have an accreditation body that governs schools of social work and our curriculum. That doesn't mean we don't get to have our own flavor with how we teach or texts or things like that we use, but it standardizes social work education and sets the degree apart as a professional program. So that means that you are on a track for licensure, whereas most degrees are not. So if you majored in psychology, for example, you would not have a direct line to a specific profession, because that is a broad major that's a non-professional path. Whereas social work, you graduate and you are prepared to sit for licensure. And that's true. Sometimes we get questions about if it matters what state you go to school in and that sort of thing, and it doesn't. You're prepared to sit for the board of any state. So we are, social work's a protected title, so you can't just say, you can't be like, I've got a really good first aid kit and I use it a lot, so I just go ahead and call myself a nurse. You can't do that with social work just because you love people or you've worked in welfare or social services does not mean that you're a social worker. And we have internships that are put into the curriculum, which is also standardized across social work education. That means for you as a student that you exit school with a year of professional experience. So you've got your resume rolling before you graduate, which is wonderful for your next steps after school. So these are a bunch of different things that social workers do. I told the group yesterday that the slide breaks all of the PowerPoint roles because it has so much stuff on it. But you will see everything from very clinical, what we call micro, so one-on-one things that you do, like being a therapist that uses music to help children with these types of DSM diagnoses. That would be very clinical, very specific to the client. Through kind of the meso level of practice, so someone who runs grief groups or substance abuse disorder groups, or someone that runs groups for parents trying to regain guardianship of their children, so that meso level, and then up to what we call more macro social work. So people who are interested in policy, who want to work with the think tank, who want to have a job in the government. I kind of refer to that as folks who have some sense of calling or interest in kind of the big problems that we see, that we address in social work, but they don't really want to do they're not as interested in the one-on-one piece. They want to affect change at the more macro level. So we have an analogy that we use in social work education. One of our professors uses this sort of fable that you might have heard about being in a river and seeing all these starfish come down. Have you heard of this?
I heard it with babies.
Did you? Like, you see all these, you see all these babies coming down the river, and so you're like, oh my gosh, the babies are in the river and they can't swim. So I'm gonna go pull them out.
Yeah.
And eventually so there's all the people pulling them out, and eventually someone says, why are they in the river in the first place? Right. Y'all pull the babies out, and I'm gonna go upriver and figure out who's putting them in. Okay, so that's a good example of the addressing a similar problem, but at different levels.
Yeah.
And a lot of social work roles do a little bit of both. So, you don't have to pick, I hope I like people enough to be with them all the time.
Yeah.
Or I hope I like policy to do that all the time. Most of the roles I find are a little bit more of a hybrid. Okay, this is a picture of our building. We are located downtown. with other departments at Baylor that are community facing. So we've got some of the psychology department there. Our students are really in the community a lot their senior year and in grad school, and so it makes sense. I find, I don't know if you have a different opinion, that kind of the home base shifts at that point because you're out working a couple of days a week in Waco, and not really in the Baylor bubble as much, so we shift a little bit there. Baylor is known for a really strong faculty to student ratio. We're a small program, and so we have a really good one, I think.
Yeah.
And really get to know our students well. And then we have a few different 5-year programs. So back to your question of, is it going to take me, someone said that would take me 8 years. So we have what is called advanced standing in accredited schools of social work. So if you major in social work and you're in good academic standing, you will qualify for advanced standing for your MSW, which means that you're credited your senior year. That course, that curricular sequence of your senior year is the first year of the MSW.
Interesting.
So you are credited that year of grad school. So if you major in social work and you stay with us, you get automatic admission into our MSW program pending your academic progress. And then if you wanted to go to another institution, there's many institutions that have an advanced standing program. So you might want to go do your MSW at UT or Penn or wherever it is, and you will still have the benefit of that, of your undergraduate degree buying you out of that year of grad school. If you don't do that, an MSW is 2 years, which a lot of people do too. But you could, if you're in a different degree, but you want to get an MSW, that's really something to consider because it does cut a whole year off of your education and your time and your money.
Was it your advisor that told you it would take 8 years, or just like friends?
I think she said just the combination of music and social work would take 8 years. I don't know what specifically she said would do that, but
yeah. So I think with your listening to your goals, I don't know the music world, but if you're going to be a therapist, then your credentialing has to be through that first. And then you might have, like we have social workers who are therapists and they do equine therapy, but they'll go get that certification adjacent to their main credentialing, which is whatever governing, which is through licensure for social work practice.
Right.
I heard you say music education. You wouldn't necessarily need like your teaching certificate to do music therapy. You would need like what Professor Hoppy said, your licensure.
I just say education, not to get the certificates for music education, but to learn how to relate music to
like the pedagogy of it.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Okay.
That makes sense. And you might look to see the minors in the School of Music.
I'm looking those up right now.
Are you? Because maybe there's one, and if you're not talking about another credentialing requirement, then taking the coursework would give you that information.
Just music is a minor.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Weird. Yeah. I grew up as like a hardcore band kid and was like super excited to like go audition to apply for Eastman or like some big music school, and kind of realized that music is not my only passion after high school when I had a lot of friends in need. So yeah, and I actually grew up with as a third generation like person interested in social work. My mom took the social work program.
Oh, that's so interesting.
Yeah. So, yeah.
So you're trying to figure out which way, like you've kind of braided together this
Yeah.
concept and this general idea of how you're gonna put your passions and gifts together.
Yeah,
Yeah, and trying to figure out the road there.
for sure.
Yeah.
Because I mean, having my mom as like a social work parent and having all these like really depressed teens as friends was like the perfect scenario, because every time there was some sort of scare, I could just be like, Mom, we gotta go pick this person up. Like, so yeah, so it was really good, and it was good to have someone to talk to.
Yeah.
To like figure out how to go about being friends with people.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then of course I was also in therapy from like 12 to 16 because my mom was like, you.
That's a life skill,
Yeah.
learning how to, it is, I think it's a life skill that everyone needs to know, like, this is how to find a therapist, this is how to
Yeah.
have a good therapy appointment.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, should
I
add
probably-
it to learning how to drive,
Yeah.
voting, all those civic items.
I wasted like 3 years of therapy sessions.
It's okay, you're figuring it out.
But yeah.
Wow. Well, let me tell you about the courses that are taken in the degree. So, you are registered for intro, which some students
Okay.
take freshman year.
Mhm.
A lot of students also take it sophomore year. Not that you would take it twice, but some students wait and take it sophomore year. And then take human diversity and leadership. So these courses are offered on main campus, and they introduce you to the profession, and have some other students in there that aren't social work majors. So that's a little bit of a way that they stand out compared to the other courses.
Mhm.
Junior year is the real academic heart of the degree. So this is when you go through the practice sequence, which are 3 courses, and the theory sequence, which are 2 courses.
Mhm.
So human behavior and the social environment is the name of the theory sequence courses, and it's a really long name. So we abbreviate it. If you hear us say HIBC, that's that abbreviation. So the HIBC 1 course is a micro theory course. So that course covers lifespan development.
Mhm.
And because we're in social work, we do quite a bit of cultural competency related to lifespan development. So how might that differ? How might our benchmarks that we're assessing for differ because of cultural differences, ability, language, some of those diversity implications. And then the HIBC 2 theory course is a macro theory course. So we study theories like social learning theory, structural violence, social capital, how things like supremacy are created in society, how power and oppression are used and misused. So some of those theoretical concepts that are connected to social movements. So what was brewing and what was happening related to human behavior, and then how did that bring us to the feminist movement or civil rights movement or
That should be required with driving.
yes, that should be required.
Especially right now.
So that's a heavy hitter course. I teach that course, and I feel like every day I go into class, I'm like, well, I'm going to talk about all these really terrible things that happen in society and why they happen and what we can do about it.
I wish my current events teacher from high school was like actually related it back to
Some of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you take those fall and spring, and then fall in your junior year, fall semester, you take practice 1, and that class is our beginning interviewing and communications course. So you learn, do you remember geometry proofs? You don't? Okay.
I mean, I would even take a class.
So in geometry, you have a rule. Do you remember geometry?
No.
There's that rule. You have a rule, and then you have what that rule tells you about the equation. Okay, so you have to be able to name. You have to name every step. We do that with your verbal processing in practice 1. So everything that you say to a client should have a name and a reason for why you said it. So we deconstruct communication and interviewing, and teach some other processes that we call cognitive and affective processes around tuning in to clients. So what's going on with the client, what's going on with me, how am I interfacing with this issue? So that's our practice 1 class. And then practice 2 and 3, 1 is a groups course, so students learn how to run a group. So how do you develop a coalition? How do you develop a board? How do you run a support group? How might you run a grief group? How might you run a task group that's required to produce a policy in 8 weeks? How do you manage group members, which is always a lot of fun. So how do you manage power dynamics in a group? So we cover that in groups, and then in practice 3, that's our organizations and communities class. And that's the course where students learn skills related to macro practice. So how do I get entity A and entity B to have a productive conversation about an area of dispute? Or how do I get this neighborhood association to have a voice before the city council about a concern that they have? Or how do I address a food desert in this zip code? So those are the skills that are learned in that practice course. So you can see through the practice sequence where you hit those micro, meso, and then macro levels of practice.
Do you kind of have to work with micro a while before getting into macro?
Yeah, because all macro practice is based on micro practice.
Yeah.
So I always have students in practice 1, in both. So I teach a micro course and a macro course. And in my micro course, my students who want to go, charge the mountain are like, I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but I don't really want to talk to a fake client about their depression. Right? Because we do those role plays.
Yeah.
Right? So I'm thinking, okay, well, when you're going to do your macro work, you are eventually going to sit down with one person.
Yeah.
And you're going to have to do this whole thing with them.
Yeah.
Right? And then in the macro sphere, I'll be talking about structural violence, and my students are like, I just want to be a therapist. Why do I have to learn about structural violence? I'm like, well, if you don't understand why your client ended up in the situation, then all the background behind it, then you're going to be not as capable to help them. So they really do complement each other.
For sure.
And you'll be in class with students who come in like, I really want to be a counselor. And then someone who's like, I would just break out into hives if I was a counselor. I really want to address criminal justice reform.
It is beautiful to see how it comes naturally to some people, though. I naturally am a very micro level thinker, and some of my best friends are naturally macro level. And I'm like, how did you think of that type of intervention? And
yes,
and
it helps you learn.
Yeah,
it does help you learn.
I feel like I'm interested in both.
Yes,
yeah.
Which is good because you do both.
Okay.
I think there can be a misconception that you pick.
Yeah.
And I like to give a couple of examples of things that I have done as a social worker to show that. So I had a job as a school social worker in a Title I high school. So everyone is on free or reduced lunch. It's mostly non-white students who are living below the poverty line. I had a caseload of students, so I'm working with them one-on-one, like, are you passing? Are you attending class? Are you in detention all the time? Are you abusing alcohol and drugs, right? Very, very specific to them. I also happened to go in as one of the only Spanish speakers on the campus and suddenly ended up suddenly ended up with the whole other caseload of immigrant students who had very legal status and very little access to health care. So while I was doing, so I'm over here going through case plans student by student, and then I'm over here thinking, okay, where do you find dental care in McLennan County if you are not a citizen?
Yeah.
Which was really hard to figure out. It might still be. That was 20 years ago. So how do I find dental care for this population? How do I address the translating needs for the population because they weren't being addressed? So I had all of these macro policy. They were more macro, and that's sort of small macro. I had another job where I oversaw placement of children in foster care for children from DFW to San Antonio. So that's a really big scale area.
Yeah.
But the issues that I was dealing with were very clinical. So I was knee deep in diagnostic material, psychotropic medication knowledge, behaviors related to abuse and neglect, supporting medically fragile children. So very large scale, but really clinical information or content. So you're on the right track thinking, I really like both of those.
Yeah.
But that's a good thing, because I think sometimes students come in and they're like, I like this one. And then they go into their field internship and they're like, oh wait,
I worked at a
this is
Title
a
I.
problem over here.
Yeah, I worked at a Title I school as well, and the homeless liaisons, they did exactly what you did. They kind of hold the balance between micro and macro because they have their caseloads, but then they also have to be informed of policy for homeless students, advocate for homeless students, be aware of resources, create coalitions, all of that. So I think in a lot of situations you have the opportunity to do both. I always found myself only doing micro because that's what I'm comfortable with. Yeah, but a lot of people are happy holding that balance.
Yeah.
I feel like it would be really cool to take like, I don't know, some chunk of time doing solely micro to like see perspective, see, get experience and get to know people as like a population.
Yeah.
And then move on to like, hey, I've worked with people who are in serious need and I think I can help with policy change.
Yeah. Or they inform each other, right? So we've probably all been impacted by some policy that we think, did people make this that actually live in my experience? Because it seems like they don't. No. Right? So we're laughing because it's true.
Yeah.
So we can become effective policy creators and advocates when we have the, kind of that boots on the ground experience. So senior year, you are in an internship and you get to do just what you described. So you have a caseload, you have clients, you are doing assessments, you are figuring out how you build working relationships with other professionals in the practice setting that you're in. So say I'm in a school, how do I interface with the counselor or the principal or the communities and schools office or the local churches or the volunteers that show up at the school, and then how do I build rapport with the students that are in my group that I'm running, or how do I really understand their behaviors, and that, how do I draw on my knowledge from my theory courses and practice courses to do that. So you'll do 16 hours a week, so it's a pretty heavy lift, fall and spring. And then there's also a data analysis course sequence. So you're in a data analysis course one semester and a research course another. So you get a good amount of stats, which is exciting. It's like the neuroscience. Exciting for some and less exciting for others.
Yeah.
And then all of our students also take an elective, so that will be something that you can pick that's interesting to you. So a few examples of those are, population specific. We have gerontology electives. We have, we've had a child maltreatment elective. We usually have some type of grief or trauma elective. Sometimes we offer a spirituality and social work elective, so we have an additional competency that notes that religion, worldview, and spirituality is part of the human experience. It is not a Christian competency. It is just saying, whatever you think about that matters to your human experience. Even saying, the example I gave yesterday was, if I work in hospice and the family says we are non-religious, that matters to how they process and manage death and the rite of passage of death. So that might matter to how they plan a funeral. And I want to be competent in how to assess that as part of their worldview and values. So we have some minors in the school. You don't have to have a minor, and you can if you want to. But we have a poverty and social justice minor, a gerontology minor, and then our civic interfaith studies is that's our newest minor, and that is something that's been developed with the spiritual life department, that came out of some work that Baylor has done around public deliberation and positive interfaith work. So what does it mean to have someone, 5 people that come from different philosophies or religious or spiritual preferences? What does it mean for them to come together and affect positive change around an issue that they have in common or their community? And there's some really encouraging models of that. So those are the minors. Do you have anything that you want to add related to career stuff?
Yeah.
Take questions.
Yeah, definitely. So I already introduced myself. I'm Alex. I'm part of the Career Center, so we're separate from Garland School, but we work with Garland School. Myself and Sydney Corey, she's the assistant director, we're both graduates of the master's program, and I actually did the 5-year program, so I'm undergrad and grad school.
So a great example of what you can do with a
Yes.
social work degree. Not
Yes.
what you would think, right?
No, you wouldn't.
Yeah.
And I tell people that when they come in all the time, social work is whatever you want it to be in some ways. It's such a broad profession. And I knew I loved working with people and I wanted to help people. But being in that therapeutic setting wasn't necessarily for me. I'm more pragmatic. So that's how I found myself in this role, because it is much more pragmatic and anyway, better fit for me. You didn't ask, you might not care, but there it is.
It's extra.
Yeah, some extra information.
Of course, love it.
Anyways, so what we do is we help with all things post-college, which you're not even in college yet, but we want you to start thinking about what your professional goals are, and it sounds like you have a pretty good idea, but we help with creating your resume when, like what Professor Hoppy said, you'll have your internship senior year, so we want to make sure your resume looks really good for that. And then you have an interview for those internships, and we don't want you to go in and just kind of bomb the interview. That wouldn't go well. That's not a great way to start out with your internship. So we want to make sure that you have all those tools for success when it comes to securing the right opportunities for yourself. And then when grad school comes around, if you do choose to go on with the 5-year program at Baylor, that's great. If not, we can help you identify a program that's a good fit for you and craft a personal statement. For grad schools, they usually ask for a CV. which is shorthand for a lot more I'm not going to try to say, but we can help you craft that. But we really try to engage you as freshmen because we want you to have sort of the same eagerness towards post-grad as you did to get into college. That same work ethic. So I'll give you my card before I leave.
Oh, heck yeah. Thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah.
And then I think you had one other. I think
Oh
you
yes, there's
covered
one more. We have a presentation in Foster 143 today at 2:30. So one of our assistant directors is going to just talk about who the Career Center is, go more in depth about the services that we offer, and yeah, we have a lot of success stories from the Career Center. Just in, I feel like the professional world, there's a lot of caveats that nobody knows about, and so we're here to help you guide those and not just get, you know, tricked up by all of the crazy things that come with applications and interviewing and all that. So,
Heck yeah. Thank you guys so much.
Yeah, what questions do you have that we haven't answered?
Is there a way to do internship earlier in?
If you graduate earlier,
Oh, okay.
usually, that's the short answer.
Okay.
So we do have some students that come in, and they come in with enough credit hours that they are basically starting as a sophomore. But you don't have the coursework that you need to have. You have to have the coursework before you are verified for the internship. So that's why it sits where it does at the end of the curriculum. And you have a class that's connected to that so that you can receive course credit for all of the time that you're spending doing that work. And a place to process that, because it is hard, you know, moving from doing vignettes in class and working with kind of pretend clients to showing up in the field.
my first day of internship, I had a client die.
Did you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was working with a geriatric population, and
Yeah.
my client asphyxiated and died. So I had a lot to process in my
Yeah.
internship course. It's a lot.
It's a lot.
Yeah, and that was an offhand experience. That did not happen
That doesn't
really to
happen to other
anybody
people.
else.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, my first day as a social worker out of school,
yeah,
my very first meeting with a student, they disclosed suicidal ideation. You know, so we're sharing that because students really do need the year of internship with the support of your professor and your supervisor that's at the agency or at the placement site. So that when you graduate and you go into the field on your own, you've already, it's not your first lap, right?
Yeah.
And you've managed some crises, you've managed some big ethical questions. I teach that course, and that's the one course sequence where you're together with your class the whole year. So I really get to know those placements and get to know those students, and they're helpful. Internships are so helpful, even if you find out that that's not your area of practice or your population that you love. That's just as important to find out. Like maybe you would find out, I always thought I really liked working with groups, and they just make my anxiety too high or something.
Yeah.
You know, like I could do it, I need to be competent in doing it, but I don't know that that's what I want to do 90% of my job. Or the opposite, right? I was so nervous about groups, and now I could do a job where that's all I do all day because I love it so much, and I'm actually pretty good at it, and I didn't realize that. So I think the internship helps students identify both preferences and gifts that they have. Like, I didn't really know I was a data person, but it turns out I really am.
and all that to say, our internships are different than the School of Social Work internships because they're not social work specific internships, but you said that you were interested in learning more about macro, so I have some employers that have summer internships for things like food access inequality, things like that. So if you're interested in taking on a summer internship, and some of them are paid, which is great.
Yeah.
It's not great pay, but it's pay.
I have my apartment that I'm leasing out is year round. So.
Okay, yeah, so there's opportunities through the Career Center that we can get you connected to internships where you're exposed to areas that you're interested in. They're not social work internships, but they're internships where you can learn more about a population that you think.
And that can be any year, any summer.
Yeah.
You can start next summer.
Yeah, so you could do one of those internships next summer, and then shortly, 18 months later, you're doing your year-long social work internship. So that's such a good point to bring up, that you don't have to wait to get some experience in an area of interest to you. Knowing the social work internship is very specific. It's very specific based on the curriculum, based on the competencies. It's highly regulated, as it should be.
Yeah.
Right? And then you have this other great option through the university at large in some way that could get you connected to like a food security type of placement where it's not social work, but it is maybe a content area that you're really interested in.
And it's like a registered behavior tech. I mean, that's
that's awesome.
Not social work specific, but you're working with individuals who have behavioral issues.
That's
right.
Something good to put on.
Yes, and would give you exposure to an area of practice, because both of those examples that Alex just shared are places that social workers work, right? So you would be adding to your resume, but also to your experience headed into grad school, thinking through, I really liked that, and it was really policy related. Who knew that or I really, I loved that part of it, and this other part I thought I was gonna be super jazzed about, and I actually am not. And that is very helpful information before you go bite off a graduate degree. So I'm a big fan of getting as many of those experiences as you can.
Heck yeah. Good to know ahead of time.
Yeah.
I was thinking about doing some sort of like summer abroad or something, but
I mean, there's nothing wrong with that either.
Yeah, students do that. So, the summertime is a great time if you're going to plan to do study abroad. It doesn't mess with your degree planning as much.
One thing is I do have the apartment year round, so my mom's already mad at me for thinking about it, so internship's better. Because then I can also use my GI Bill thing while I do it.
Yeah. Internships, and then you can volunteer at places, really anything to help build your resume and get exposure.
Thank you.
Is good.
Awesome. Thank you guys.
Sure.
Yeah.
Do you have any other questions before you go on? I know you have a really full day of going to all the things.
Yeah, I think I'm good for now. I'm sure I'll see both of you at some point during the school year.
I'll email you just to be sure that you have my name and my email, and I'll copy Rachel Garcia, who's our program manager and advisor.
Awesome.
And so she's the person to talk to if you're wanting to switch. I don't know how you're registered in the system, if you're registered as a pre-social work student or not.
I think it's pretty.
Yeah, so you would enter as pre-social work. But because you mentioned music, I wanted to ask about that. So if you have questions about some of your degree planning or the 1101 course,
For sure.
she will be able to answer those for you.
Awesome. I feel like adding 1 credit wouldn't kill me.
No, and it's not a really intensive.
Thank you so much.
It's not like a big academically intensive course.
I have 15 right
Hours.
now. Yeah, I have chapel too, but like it's not gonna.
Yeah.
I
You should be able to add the hour, and then you'll meet other pre-social work students who are just starting. I think that's a benefit of that
For sure.
1101 course.
It looks like we are probably pretty small entering.
Yes, yeah.
The cohort gets very close though. I met two of my
Yes.
best friends through that.
I actually don't know